Imagine a city trapped, surrounded on all sides, cut off from the outside world. Imagine the streets once filled with laughter and daily life now silent, except for the distant echo of artillery and the whispers of fear. This was Leningrad in 1941, a city on the brink of disaster, facing an enemy determined to break it. But Hitler, instead of ordering a full-scale assault, made a decision that would change the course of history, a prolonged siege. His choice was shaped by the bitter lessons of Kiev, where German forces had suffered devastating losses, and by the conflicting priorities of a sprawling war on the Eastern Front. The city, home to millions, became a fortress of resilience. Soldiers, civilians, students, and even the elderly were thrust into the struggle, transforming ordinary streets into battle lines and makeshift barricades. Anti-aircraft guns were repurposed to fend off tanks, and ordinary citizens learned to dig trenches, haul supplies, and defend their homes with whatever they could find. It was a fight not only against the German army but against time, hunger, and the harsh Russian winter that would arrive to test every ounce of human endurance. Every decision made by the German High Command now carried weight far beyond the battlefield. With Panzer Group 4 withdrawn to support other offensives and heavy artillery sent elsewhere, the attackers were slowed, immobilized, and left to rely on sheer numbers and persistence. Meanwhile, Leningrad's defenders, under the careful guidance of General Zhukov, began to transform despair into determination. The city's people learned quickly that survival required ingenuity, courage, and an unbreakable spirit. As winter approached, the challenges grew. Roads became rivers of mud, freezing temperatures turned them into treacherous ice, and the cold itself became a weapon. German vehicles sank into the Rasputitsa, tanks stalled, and supply lines were cut. The defenders, hardened by adversity, turned these natural obstacles into advantages, holding their positions and striking when the enemy was most vulnerable. Every day became a battle of endurance, every ration a precious lifeline, and every act of resistance a statement that Leningrad would not fall easily. This story is not just about strategy or military might. It is about human resilience, ingenuity, and the lengths people will go to protect their home and their lives. The Siege of Leningrad reminds us that even in the darkest hours, courage and unity can shine through, creating moments of heroism that inspire generations. If you want to follow more stories that uncover the untold struggles and extraordinary courage of history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life. Stay with us as we explore the harrowing journey of Leningrad and discover what it truly took to survive the longest siege in modern history. As the chilling winds of late autumn swept across the Russian plains, Army Group North found itself facing a dilemma that would shape the fate of an entire city. The withdrawal of Panzer Group 4, a formidable armored force that had once promised rapid advances and decisive victories, left the German commanders with a hollow echo of strength, a phantom of what might have been, without the tanks, without the heavy artillery that could have reduced fortifications to rubble. The army's movement slowed to a crawl, and the notion of a swift capture of Leningrad became an impossible dream. The streets of the city, though battered and unprepared for the initial onslaught, now gained time to breathe, to reorganize, and to fortify under the direction of General Zhukov, whose presence injected discipline and strategy into what had been a chaotic defense. In the outskirts of the city, abandoned German tanks stood as silent witnesses to the miscalculations of strategy and the unforgiving nature of the Russian terrain. Autumn rains turned roads into seas of mud, swallowing wheels and tracks, immobilizing vehicles that were meant to carry men and supplies to the front lines. Soldiers struggled to push, to tow, and to dip. their breath visible in the cold, the machinery useless against the stubborn clay and ice that conspired against them. In those moments, the environment itself became an ally to the defenders, slowing the enemy, creating openings for counterattacks, and allowing the people of Leningrad to prepare for a siege that would last far longer than anyone could have imagined. Within the city, the residents witnessed a transformation of their familiar streets into a labyrinth of defense. Makeshift barricades sprouted from rubble, and ordinary homes were converted into strongpoints. Anti-aircraft guns, once intended to ward off bombers, were mounted on improvised platforms to repel the armored vehicles that now sat stranded in mud outside the city gates. Students, workers, and sailors answered the call to arms, and every able-bodied citizen became a cog in the complex machinery of survival. Supplies were rationed with meticulous care, and the ingenuity of the populace was as much a weapon as any artillery piece. Each day that passed without a breach of the city's defenses was a small victory. Each night survived under constant threat, a testament to human perseverance. Meanwhile, the German command grappled with the consequences of their own strategic missteps. The lack of mobility not only hindered the advance but also exposed logistical weaknesses, as supply lines stretched thin over roads that were little more than tracks through mud and frozen rivers. Every attempt to move artillery or vehicles became an ordeal of endurance, often resulting in equipment being abandoned or destroyed in frustration. Soldiers, once confident in the power of their machines, were forced to confront a harsh reality. Technology alone could not conquer the resilience of a city and its people, nor could it overcome the combined obstacles of weather, terrain, and determined resistance. The psychological toll on both sides was immense. For the Germans, the stalled advance bred frustration and a creeping sense of vulnerability, as months of planning yielded only incremental gains and unforeseen setbacks. For the defenders, each day that the enemy faltered reinforced hope and resolve, and General Zhukov's calculated use of reinforcements, raiding parties, and defensive lines demonstrated that strategy could counterbalance raw force. The city, once teetering on the edge of panic, became a symbol of organized defiance, a place where civilian courage merged seamlessly with military acumen to create a shield against the advancing army. As winter descended, the landscape transformed into a frozen battlefield where mobility became an even more precious commodity. Tanks immobilized by mud months earlier were now encased in ice, supplies frozen in the ground, and every movement became a battle against the elements as much as against the enemy. The defenders exploited these conditions, staging ambushes along narrow passes, hiding forces in snowdrifts, and striking with precision when the German forces were most vulnerable. Time, which had initially seemed like an enemy to the besieged city, became an ally, allowing reinforcements to arrive and giving civilians and soldiers alike a chance to adapt and prepare. Through this prolonged period of attrition, the city's ability to endure became as important as any weapon or formation. Food, already scarce, was distributed in minimal rations, and every citizen learned the value of resourcefulness. From melting ice for water to scrounging for firewood and fuel, the ingenuity of ordinary people, from students to elderly residents, became part of the defense apparatus, blurring the line between combatant and civilian and illustrating that survival in Leningrad depended on the collective will and action of the entire population. The German army, despite its size and training, was forced to contend with a human network of resilience and an environment that refused to bend to conventional tactics. In retrospect, the withdrawal of Panzer Group 4 and the absence of heavy artillery marked a turning point in the siege, revealing the limitations of mechanized warfare when faced with harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, and a population determined to resist. What might have been a rapid conquest turned into a grueling, drawn-out engagement that tested the endurance, ingenuity, and courage of all involved. it demonstrated that strategy and resourcefulness could rival brute force. That the heart of a city and its people could withstand pressures that might have crushed even the most disciplined armies elsewhere. And that history is often shaped not just by guns and tanks, but by resilience, adaptability, and unyielding determination. In the shadow of immobilized armor and stranded supply convoys, Leningrad's story unfolded as a testament to human tenacity, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the combined efforts of soldiers and civilians could alter the course of war. The siege would continue for months, a prolonged struggle that tested every limit. Yet it was the city's ability to endure born from a mixture of strategy, courage, and ingenuity that ultimately defined the character of Leningrad and etched its place into history as a symbol of resilience against seemingly insurmountable adversity. The city of Leningrad, teetering on the edge of catastrophe, seemed almost paralyzed in the early days of the German advance, its defenses scattered and uncoordinated, as if the lifeblood of the city itself had been momentarily frozen by fear and uncertainty. Streets that once bustled with life now echoed with the nervous steps of soldiers and citizens alike. And the walls of buildings that had stood for centuries offered little protection against the encroaching storm. It was in this moment of precarious fragility that General Georgy Zhukov arrived, a figure whose reputation for decisiveness and tactical brilliance would soon become synonymous with the city's struggle for survival. Zhukov quickly assessed the disarray, recognizing that without immediate reorganization, Leningrad would fall not through a single catastrophic attack, but through a slow, grinding attrition that would starve its people and crush their spirit. With a sharp mind and an unyielding determination, Zhukov set about transforming the city's fragmented defenses into a coherent, responsive force, turning fear into action and disorder into strategy. He understood that traditional tactics alone would not suffice. For the German army, despite the setbacks caused by the withdrawal of Panzer Group 4 and the immobilization of their artillery, remained a deadly force capable of exploiting any weakness. The defenders needed ingenuity, and the city itself had to become a weapon. In a bold and unconventional move, Zhukov proposed anti-aircraft guns, originally designed to fend off bombing raids, to serve as anti-tank weapons, giving the defenders a fighting chance against the armored divisions that now prowled the outskirts of the city. These improvised measures were not just practical, they were symbolic, a demonstration that human creativity and resourcefulness could counterbalance the raw power of mechanized warfare. The streets of Leningrad became a canvas upon which Zhukov painted a new strategy, blending military discipline with the city's chaotic energy. Barricades rose from rubble, trenches were dug along main thoroughfares, and every building, from government offices to apartment blocks, was transformed into a potential stronghold. Civilians were enlisted into the effort, not merely as bystanders but as active participants in the city's defense, learning to operate the converted guns, transport supplies under fire, and tend to the wounded. Students, naval brigades, and hastily conscripted volunteers worked alongside seasoned soldiers, their collective effort blurring the line between military and civilian, forging a united front that became both literal and psychological. Each improvised fortification, each strategically placed weapon, reinforced the message that Leningrad would not yield without exacting a steep price from the invaders. As winter crept closer, the city's preparations took on an urgency that seemed almost palpable in the biting air. The cold itself became a weapon in Zhukov's arsenal, for he understood that Russian winters could cripple the enemy as effectively as any artillery shell. Roads turned to ice and mud, tanks struggled to maintain traction, and German supply lines became increasingly vulnerable to disruption. Within the city, every street corner, every frozen canal, was evaluated for its potential to slow or channel enemy advances, turning the city's natural geography into a defensive asset. The converted anti-aircraft guns, now positioned strategically along these critical points, offered a formidable deterrent against tanks and armored vehicles, while the human defenders, trained under Zhukov's exacting standards, prepared to exploit every weakness. Zhukov's genius was not confined to the deployment of weaponry alone. It extended to the orchestration of morale, communication, and logistics. The city, though under siege, became a hive of disciplined activity, with supply lines managed under extreme conditions, and reinforcements shuffled efficiently to respond to the constantly shifting front. Civilians who had never held a weapon in their lives were trained to operate defenses, their resilience bolstered by the knowledge that they were integral to the survival of their families and neighbors. Every success, no matter how small, became a rallying point, and each setback was met with determination rather than despair. The psychological warfare of Leningrad's defense was as critical as the physical measures. For the sight of prepared, organized resistance sent a message to the Germans that victory would not be simple or swift. The interplay between human ingenuity and environmental adversity played a pivotal role in these early months. And freezing temperatures, once considered obstacles, became allies under Zhukov's guidance. German armored vehicles, already hindered by the absence of Panzer Group 4 and the logistical challenges of transporting heavy artillery, now found themselves increasingly vulnerable to the city's improvised defenses. Each advance was met with carefully coordinated countermeasures, raids, and ambushes, turning the siege into a test not just of firepower but of patience, strategy, and endurance. The defenders learned to adapt to the rhythms of their surroundings, exploiting every opportunity to slow the enemy, conserve resources, and maintain the cohesion of the city's defenses. Through these measures, the disorganized initial state of Leningrad's defenses transformed into a formidable, multi-layered network capable of resisting the German onslaught. Zhukov's leadership, his ability to blend conventional military tactics with adaptive improvisation, and his foresight in mobilizing the city's population created a resilient defensive system that extended beyond mere fortifications. It became a symbol of the city's unyielding spirit, demonstrating that even in the face of overwhelming force, organized determination, creativity, and collective action could shift the balance of a seemingly desperate situation. In the streets, on the rooftops, and behind barricades, the people of Leningrad experienced a profound transformation. Ordinary citizens became soldiers, students became engineers of survival, and the very architecture of the city became a weapon in a battle for life itself. Zhukov's conversion of anti-aircraft guns into anti-tank defenses epitomized the ingenuity required to survive, a practical and symbolic act that underscored a central truth. In Leningrad, the city itself was alive, and its defense depended as much on human will and adaptability as on the presence of soldiers or artillery. The seeds of resilience planted during those critical early weeks would sustain the city through the darkest periods of the siege, ensuring that when history recorded the story of Leningrad, it would be remembered not only for the suffering endured, but for the extraordinary human effort that made endurance, resistance, and survival possible. As the German advance pressed ever closer, the heart of Leningrad beat with a mixture of fear and determination. For the city's survival now depended not solely on trained soldiers or fortified positions, but on the collective resolve of every citizen willing to defend their home. Students, naval brigades, and hastily drafted reinforcements became the lifeblood of the city's defense, their presence a testament to the extraordinary circumstances that transformed ordinary lives into acts of heroism. Classrooms once filled with textbooks and lectures became centers of military instruction, where young men and women learned to handle weapons, dig trenches, and operate the improvised defenses that General Zhukov had meticulously organized. The halls echoed with the new cadence of drills and commands, a rhythm that mirrored the urgency of survival and the gravity of the siege that now enveloped their city. Along the canals and narrow streets, naval brigades, whose training had previously focused on maritime operations, adapted to the urban battlefield with surprising ingenuity. They reinforced barricades, constructed observation posts, and coordinated defensive positions along strategic choke points where armored vehicles and infantry might attempt to breach the city's perimeter. Their knowledge of movement, discipline, and coordinated action, honed at sea, translated effectively to the city's streets, allowing them to anticipate enemy maneuvers and respond with precision. Meanwhile, reinforcements from the surrounding regions, soldiers who had endured long marches and previous skirmishes, brought with them not only additional manpower but crucial experience in warfare, helping to integrate the various elements of Leningrad's improvised defense into a coherent, adaptable force capable of responding to the shifting dynamics of the siege. The influx of these new defenders created a remarkable dynamic within the city. Civilians who had once been passive observers now found themselves woven into a vast network of resistance. Their daily routines redefined by the demands of survival and defense. Mothers and fathers, students and clerks, sailors and conscripts all worked in unison, understanding that each task, whether mundane or dangerous, contributed to the preservation of the city. From distributing rations to maintaining barricades, from scouting enemy positions to assisting the wounded, every action carried weight, and every individual became indispensable in a struggle where the line between life and death was constantly tested. The shared purpose fostered a sense of unity and resolve that transcended age, background, and prior experience, creating a community forged in the crucible of crisis. As winter's grip tightened, the contributions of students, naval brigades, and reinforcements proved increasingly vital. The frozen streets, slick with ice and snow, became a battlefield where mobility was limited and every misstep could be fatal. The converted anti-aircraft guns, now positioned to counter armored advances, required skilled operators, and the new recruits learned quickly under the watchful eyes of experienced soldiers. Drills became second nature, and the young defenders began to exhibit a level of discipline and coordination that belied their inexperience. In tandem with the city's entrenched soldiers, they patrolled the streets, manned checkpoints, and reinforced weakened positions, their presence a crucial factor in the city's ability to absorb and repel repeated German probes. The psychological impact of these reinforcements cannot be overstated. The Germans, despite their numerical advantage and mechanized strength, faced a city whose population seemed inexhaustible in its determination. Every new group of defenders that appeared along the front lines reinforced the sense that Leningrad would not yield easily, that its people were willing to endure unimaginable hardship to protect their homes. The morale of the city's inhabitants soared with each visible effort, each successful repulsion of enemy forces, and each moment when ordinary citizens demonstrated extraordinary courage. In a city where starvation, disease, and the freezing winter threatened daily survival, these acts of defense became symbols of hope, signaling that the struggle was shared and that resilience was possible even under dire circumstances. The training, coordination, and integration of students and reinforcements into Leningrad's defensive strategy also allowed General Zhukov to deploy his forces more effectively. Positions that might have remained weak or vulnerable were now reinforced. Patrols were more frequent and organized, and counterattacks could be executed with a degree of precision that would have been impossible without these additional personnel. The city's defenses evolved from ad hoc measures into a layered system capable of responding dynamically to enemy movements, leveraging the combined energy, courage, and creativity of its people. Each reinforcement was not merely a body to fill a position, but a node in a complex network that transformed the city into a living fortress. Through these combined efforts, the city of Leningrad demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to the unprecedented pressures of siege warfare. Streets once lined with civilians now bristled with defenders ready to act at a moment's notice. Rooftops canals became observation points and strongholds, and ordinary citizens, armed with knowledge, courage, and makeshift weaponry, contributed in ways that directly influenced the course of the battle. The presence of students, naval brigades, and reinforcements ensured that every corner of the city could be monitored and defended, creating a depth of resistance that even the most determined assault could not easily penetrate. In this extraordinary convergence of youth, experience, and civilian resolve, Leningrad became more than a city under siege. It became a testament to human ingenuity and the power of collective action in the face of overwhelming adversity. The combined efforts of these diverse groups of defenders not only bolstered the city's physical defenses but also fortified its spirit, proving that resilience is forged not merely through arms and fortifications, but through shared purpose, courage, and the unwavering commitment of a population united against a common threat. In every street, every barricade, and every watchful eye, the story of Leningrad's determination came alive, illustrating that even in the darkest hours, human tenacity can turn the tide and preserve hope against seemingly insurmountable odds. As the bitter chill of autumn settled over the outskirts of Leningrad, the advancing German columns found themselves facing an adversary far more relentless than the city's defenders. The Rasputitsa, the infamous season of mud that transformed roads into treacherous quagmires and rendered vehicles of every size helpless, turning mechanized precision into chaos and frustration. Tanks, trucks, and supply vehicles, previously symbols of German military might, sank into the thick, viscous ground, their engines straining in vain as the earth seemed to swallow their weight, each futile attempt at movement leaving them deeper mired in a growing morass. Commanders watched helplessly as formations that had once promised rapid breakthroughs ground to a halt, immobilized by terrain they had never truly understood. And as the muddy landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the carefully orchestrated advance that had been planned with meticulous precision dissolved into a nightmare of stuck wheels, abandoned vehicles, and frustrated troops. For the defenders within Leningrad, this natural obstacle became an unanticipated ally. From their vantage points along the improvised fortifications, General Zhukov and his officers observed the German forces struggle. Their advance slowed to a crawl, and the rhythm of the city's resistance gained breathing space to strengthen and consolidate. Every stranded tank or immobilized convoy became a strategic advantage, a moment of reprieve in which reinforcements could be positioned, barricades reinforced, and patrols conducted with greater freedom. The students, naval brigades, and local volunteers, already engaged in a tireless effort to maintain the city's defenses, seized on these opportunities to further tighten their hold over critical points, and the collective energy of a population determined to survive found a new rhythm dictated not by enemy fire but by the cruel, unyielding mud beneath their feet. The Rasputitsa was merciless and indiscriminate, sparing neither the experienced nor the unprepared. German officers, accustomed to European roads and predictable terrain, were baffled by the depth and stickiness of the mud. Their traditional reliance on mechanized power rendered irrelevant. Vehicles designed to traverse long distances under any condition became liabilities, swallowed by an endless expanse of sludge, and every attempt to extract them only compounded the problem. As more wheels sank and engines failed under strain, communications between units faltered, and the mobility of artillery, which had been limited already by the withdrawal of Panzer Group 4, became an almost insurmountable challenge, further hampering their ability to project force into the city's perimeter. Each day in the mud brought a new series of setbacks, from stranded supply trucks to immobilized tanks, and the German High Command was forced to confront the limits of their logistical planning in an environment entirely alien to their experience. Winter arrived with a ferocity that seemed almost personal, bringing with it a biting cold that added to the Germans' suffering and compounded the obstacles presented by the autumnal mud. Engines seized in the freezing temperatures. Metal tracks became brittle and cracked under strain. And ammunition, so carefully stockpiled, failed to perform as expected in the frigid conditions. Troops struggled to keep warm, their morale tested as they labored under the combined weight of physical exhaustion and the harshness of the environment. While every supply line became a gamble, every movement a potential disaster, the very land of Russia itself seemed to fight alongside the defenders, each frozen canal and snowbound street shaping the battlefield in ways that no human command could entirely control, and forcing the invaders into a desperate improvisation that often failed under the weight of environmental adversity. For the inhabitants and defenders of Leningrad, the Rasputitsa and the encroaching winter provided both tactical and psychological advantages. They had learned to move in these conditions, to leverage the frozen streets and muddy avenues to conceal positions, execute ambushes, and maintain supply lines where the Germans could not. The converted anti-aircraft guns, placed strategically on high points and along choke points, could now target immobilized enemy vehicles with devastating effect. And the disciplined coordination of students, naval brigades, and reinforcements ensured that even the smallest tactical opportunities were exploited fully. What had seemed at first an insurmountable environmental challenge for all became a weapon in the hands of those who knew the terrain intimately, blending human ingenuity with the raw, unyielding power of nature. The interplay of mud and human resilience turned Leningrad's outskirts into a complex battlefield where the advantages of the German mechanized army were neutralized, and where strategic ingenuity, adaptability, and determination could dictate the tempo of the conflict. Commanders within the city, observing the slowed and disoriented enemy columns, were able to anticipate movements, redeploy forces, and execute counterattacks that might have been impossible under ordinary circumstances. Every immobilized tank and abandoned vehicle became a marker of opportunity, and every delay in the German advance provided precious time to strengthen defenses, evacuate civilians from vulnerable sectors, and maintain the cohesion of the city's collective effort to survive the siege. The winter and mud did not merely hinder the German forces. They reshaped the narrative of the siege, transforming the landscape into a participant in the struggle. The defenders, guided by General Zhukov's strategic foresight, adapted to the conditions, turning natural obstacles into tactical tools, and demonstrating that human effort combined with an understanding of the environment could offset numerical or technological superiority. Each frozen canal, each mire-filled road, became both shield and weapon, providing defenders with crucial breathing space, reducing the effectiveness of the German assault, and underscoring the resilience of the city's people in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the eyes of Leningrad's inhabitants and defenders, the Rasputitsa and the bitter winter were not merely hardships but allies in their struggle, allies that multiplied the effectiveness of their ingenuity, discipline, and courage. The city, though under siege, displayed an extraordinary capacity to turn adversity into advantage, and as the Germans floundered in mud and ice, Leningrad's defenders learned to exploit every frozen corner, every mire-filled road, and every delay to strengthen their resolve and solidify their defenses. Through these trials, the interplay of nature and human resilience emerged as a defining characteristic of the siege, demonstrating that in the vast expanse of conflict, victory is often determined not solely by the strength of arms but by the ability to adapt, endure, and wield even the harshest elements as tools of survival. Despite the relentless pressure of the German siege, the city of Leningrad was never entirely cut off from the outside world, and in that fragile gap between isolation and survival lay a lifeline whose significance would echo throughout the annals of history. Lake Ladoga, the vast frozen expanse that came to be known as the Road of Life, and the dense forests surrounding the city, through which brave souls navigated treacherous paths to deliver essential supplies. The frozen lake, glimmering under the weak winter sun, became a perilous highway where trucks and sledges carried food, medicine, and fuel across sheets of ice that could crack at any moment, plunging their precious cargo into the freezing depths. The drivers and operators were acutely aware that each journey was a gamble with death, yet they pressed on with a determination born of necessity, understanding that the city's very survival depended on their courage and resilience. Alongside Lake Ladoga, the forest provided clandestine routes that, while slower and fraught with danger, offered a critical alternative to the lake itself. Teams of couriers, often moving under cover of darkness, navigated the thick snow-laden woods, avoiding enemy patrols, landmines, and hidden artillery positions. These routes were no mere supply lines. They were veins of hope carrying sustenance and the promise of life into a city under relentless siege. The interplay between the natural environment and human ingenuity was starkly visible here, as every frozen trail, every snow-covered path, became a tactical challenge to be mastered, and every successful delivery reinforced the fragile morale of those within Leningrad's walls. The significance of the Road of Life extended beyond its physical utility. It was a symbol of defiance and resilience. For the inhabitants of Leningrad, watching a convoy traverse the frozen lake or hearing news of supplies reaching the city brought a fleeting but precious sense of relief, a reminder that the city had not been abandoned, and that even in the face of starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment, life could still be sustained. Mothers clutched whatever portion of bread had arrived, sharing it with children whose eyes had grown accustomed to hunger, and families gathered around makeshift stoves, their warmth a small rebellion against the bitter cold and relentless siege. The lake itself became a character in the story of survival, its treacherous ice and unpredictable weather a test of skill, nerve, and endurance. And those who crossed it emerged as heroes whose bravery kept the city from collapsing entirely under the weight of encirclement. The forests, with their dense cover and hidden dangers, demanded an equally extraordinary form of courage. Couriers and supply teams moved silently, alert to every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind that might betray their presence to enemy scouts. They carried not only food and medicine, but also the intangible weight of hope, understanding that their success meant the difference between life and death for countless civilians trapped within the city. The paths they carved through the snow and ice were narrow, winding, and often obscured by storm and blizzard, yet they persisted, guided by an intimate knowledge of the terrain and an unwavering commitment to the survival of Leningrad. Each successful journey reinforced the network of resistance within the city, allowing the defenders to hold positions that might otherwise have been abandoned and ensuring that strategic points along the perimeter could be manned and maintained. As the German forces attempted to tighten their grip, the partial openings of Lake Ladoga and the forest paths became lifelines not only for material supplies but for morale and psychological sustenance. Soldiers and civilians alike drew strength from the knowledge that these routes persisted despite the enemy's efforts. That ingenuity, courage, and determination could carve channels of survival even in the harshest circumstances. The frozen lake and forests were not just geographic features. They were instruments of resilience, shaping the strategies of defense and survival in ways that mechanized weapons and overwhelming firepower could not fully counter. The interplay between the besieged city and these lifelines also highlights the broader theme of human adaptation in extremis. While the Germans relied on mechanized speed and overwhelming force, the defenders relied on intimate knowledge of terrain, environmental conditions, and the extraordinary capacity for endurance and improvisation. Lake Ladoga's ice became a fragile but reliable conduit, while the forests offered cover and secrecy, both demanding careful planning, skill, and courage. The repeated use of these routes forged a rhythm of survival, where each successful convoy and each safe passage reinforced the collective determination of the city's population and allowed strategic planning to continue despite the oppressive circumstances of the siege. Within the city, the arrival of supplies was celebrated quietly but with profound relief. Every loaf of bread, every vial of medicine, every kilogram of fuel was rationed with care, and the population adapted to shortages with grim ingenuity, turning limited resources into maximum utility. Teachers, students, workers, and soldiers coordinated their efforts to distribute the supplies efficiently, ensuring that every part of the city could continue to function, even under near-apocalyptic conditions. The coordination of these efforts reflected the city's remarkable capacity to organize under pressure, turning logistical challenges into a testament to collective resilience. The road of life and the forest paths were, in essence, lifelines woven into the broader narrative of endurance, courage, and ingenuity that defined the Siege of Leningrad. They connected the city to the outside world, provided critical sustenance, and symbolized the unbroken spirit of those who refused to surrender. In every frozen mile, in every snow-hidden trail, the story of human determination played out, reinforcing the lesson that even in the face of overwhelming odds, survival depends not only on the strength of arms but on the courage, creativity, and resolve of those willing to navigate the most perilous paths to keep hope alive. Through the delicate balance of natural obstacles and human ingenuity, Leningrad's partial connectivity to the outside world allowed it to endure, illustrating that even under siege, life could persist, hope could thrive, and determination could bend the harshest conditions into tools of survival. Lake Ladoga and the forests were not merely routes for supplies. They were lifelines, symbols of resilience, and enduring reminders that when courage meets ingenuity, even the most desperate circumstances can be overcome. As winter tightened its grip on Leningrad, the city's population faced a torment more harrowing than any bombardment or battle. The slow, insidious encroachment of starvation, disease, and despair, a crucible that tested every ounce of human endurance and moral resolve. The meager supplies that had fought their way across the frozen Lake Ladoga and through snow-laden forests provided only temporary relief, and soon the weight of the siege began to exact its true cost. Bread rations dwindled to a fraction of what a human body required to survive, and the water necessary for both drinking and sanitation became dangerously scarce, forcing residents to improvise with what little they could find or melt from snow and ice, often contaminated and unsafe. The city's once bustling streets fell eerily silent as the hunger gnawed at the bones of men, women, and children alike, reducing human activity to the barest gestures necessary to endure from one day to the next. And the psychological strain was as acute as the physical deprivation. In this grim environment, the city's defenders and civilians alike were confronted with the horrifying realities of extreme hunger. Families scavenged relentlessly, searching for any scraps of food, foraging in abandoned buildings, empty stores, and even the frozen remains of what had once been plentiful. The smell of decay and smoke from the heating fires mingled with the omnipresent chill, and every meal, no matter how small, became a precious victory against the inexorable appetite of famine. Yet even as people struggled to stretch their rations, Disease began to take hold. Typhus, dysentery, and other illnesses spread rapidly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions, exacerbated by the cold that weakened immune systems and slowed recovery. Hospitals, already under strain from bombardments and lack of staff, became overwhelmed, and medical supplies, rationed thinly even under the best of circumstances, were almost entirely exhausted. Each day brought a grim tally of the sick and the dying, and with the approach of deep winter, the pace of mortality accelerated in ways that the human mind could scarcely comprehend. The horror of starvation, however, did not end with empty stomachs. In the darkest corners of Leningrad, desperation led to acts that were unthinkable in peacetime. As the boundaries of survival were pushed to their absolute limits, cases of cannibalism began to emerge, a taboo so profound that the initial reports were met with disbelief and horror. Yet the evidence was undeniable. In a city where one could see the skeletal outlines of children and elderly alike, where the sounds of quiet despair filled the streets, the instinct to survive sometimes overcame every societal and moral constraint, creating a shadow beneath which families and neighbors were forced into unimaginable choices. Investigations later revealed that many of those involved in these acts were ordinary citizens, men and women who had never previously committed crimes. Their actions born purely from the extremity of hunger and the instinct to preserve life in a city that had been starved into near collapse. Despite these harrowing conditions, the spirit of survival persisted. Communities banded together where possible, sharing meager rations, pooling efforts to scavenge safely, and maintaining vigilance against theft or exploitation. For even in these desperate times, human solidarity could be a crucial defense against total annihilation. Each person who survived another day, who managed to find nourishment or warmth, became a testament to resilience in the face of circumstances designed to break both body and will. Parents shielded their children, neighbors helped the sick, and defenders continued to man positions around the city, often at the expense of their own sustenance, understanding that the survival of the collective was the only path through the nightmare of siege. The winter, compounded by starvation and disease, tested not only physical endurance but moral fortitude. People were forced to confront choices that no human should ever face. As the daily calculus of survival became intertwined with the well-being of their families and communities, stories emerged of remarkable courage and compassion, of individuals risking their own lives to rescue the sick or deliver vital rations, and of entire blocks or neighborhoods working together to maintain warmth and distribute food. These acts of humanity, small yet profound, illuminated the extraordinary resilience that could flourish even in the darkest of times, and they served as a stark counterpoint to the horror surrounding them. Amidst the suffering, the city's defenders remained vigilant, knowing that the slightest weakening of resistance could imperil the survival of the entire population. Military units, students, naval brigades, and volunteers pressed on in fortifying defenses, patrolling perimeters, and ensuring that any potential breach by the besieging forces was met with organized resistance. The lines between civilian and soldier blurred, as every able-bodied person contributed in some form, demonstrating that the act of survival had become a collective mission, a shared struggle against both the enemy outside and the slow starvation within. The severity of Leningrad's condition during these months created a landscape of human endurance and tragedy that is almost unimaginable. Starvation stripped the city of its vitality, disease claimed the weakest first, and the psychological weight of witnessing widespread suffering left scars as deep as the physical deprivation. Yet even in this crucible, the ingenuity and resilience of the population became evident. The creative use of limited resources, the maintenance of essential services under impossible conditions, and the persistence of hope in the face of overwhelming odds provided a lifeline not just of survival, but of human spirit. as days and weeks blurred into months, and the spectre of death hovered over every household. The road of life across Lake Ladoga and the forest paths remained a tenuous but vital connection to the outside world. Every successful delivery of bread, medicine, or fuel represented more than sustenance. It represented a reprieve, a reason to continue, and a fragile assertion of life over the encroaching shadow of famine. In this crucible of hardship, the citizens of Leningrad learned to endure, adapt, and support one another, their courage and solidarity emerging as the most potent weapons against the combined terrors of starvation, disease, and siege. Through these months of extreme deprivation, Leningrad became a testament to human resilience, showing that even in conditions designed to break the human body and spirit, determination, solidarity, and ingenuity could create pathways to survival, preserving hope in a city threatened with annihilation, and forging a legacy of endurance that would resonate for generations to come. Even as the city of Leningrad reeled under the weight of starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment, the spirit of resistance and defiance refused to be extinguished, manifesting not only in the endurance of its civilians but also in the calculated, daring acts of guerrilla raids and counterattacks that slowly, inexorably began to push back the German advances, creating a rhythm of struggle in which every inch regained was a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and unyielding determination. The Soviet forces, understanding the limitations of conventional engagement against a technologically superior enemy, increasingly relied on small, mobile units capable of striking unexpectedly, retreating before overwhelming reprisals could occur, and using the harsh winter landscape to their advantage in ways that transformed nature itself into an ally of defense. These guerrilla operations, carried out in forests, on frozen lakes, and along supply lines, were not mere skirmishes. They were strategic disruptions that sapped enemy morale, destroyed critical resources, and bought precious time for the beleaguered city to regroup and sustain itself under siege conditions. Winter, with its unforgiving cold and deep snows, became an unexpected force multiplier for the defenders, while German forces struggled to maintain mobility through the mud of autumn and the treacherous icy conditions of winter. Soviet troops, intimately familiar with the environment and acclimated to its extremes, maneuvered with precision and tenacity, exploiting frozen terrain to stage ambushes that inflicted both material and psychological damage on their opponents. Every frozen lake crossed, every snow-laden forest traversed, and every sudden, precise strike on German convoys or outposts demonstrated a mastery of terrain and tactics born from necessity, turning environmental adversity into a weapon of asymmetric advantage. For the inhabitants of Leningrad, each successful operation by these guerrilla units represented more than military success. It was a tangible reminder that the siege, though brutal and unyielding, was not absolute, and that the threads of resistance wove a lifeline of hope through the fabric of despair. The counterattacks carried out from within the city's perimeter were equally vital, blending improvisation with strategic foresight. Military units, students, naval brigades, and volunteers, many of them lacking formal combat experience, were organized under the guidance of commanders who understood the importance of every small victory. They staged sorties that targeted supply lines, reconnaissance units, and lightly defended positions, forcing the Germans into a defensive posture that slowed their progress and forced the diversion of valuable resources. In the process, the defenders adapted their limited weaponry and resources creatively, using converted anti-aircraft guns, improvised barricades, and hidden machine gun nests to exploit enemy weaknesses. Every engagement, though small in scale compared to the full might of Army Group North, compounded into a strategic effect, eroding the efficiency of the German operations and instilling a persistent uncertainty that would define the protracted struggle for months to come. These guerrilla actions and counterattacks were amplified by the broader context of environmental hardship, which consistently favored those who could endure and adapt rather than those reliant on mechanized superiority. The extreme winter conditions froze rivers and lakes, transforming natural obstacles into avenues for surprise attacks, while deep snow and blizzards concealed movements and allowed defenders to strike unexpectedly. German vehicles, already hampered by inadequate preparation for Russian mud and ice, were further immobilized by frost that seized engines, split metal tracks, and rendered ammunition unreliable in critical moments. The defenders, on the other hand, leveraged this frozen terrain to conduct ambushes that maximized damage while minimizing exposure, demonstrating that intimate knowledge of environment and adaptation to extreme conditions could offset material inferiority and inflict strategic setbacks on the attacker. The psychological impact of these actions on both sides cannot be overstated. For the Soviet defenders and civilians within Leningrad, the visible and measurable success of guerrilla operations and counterattacks provided an essential boost to morale, a reinforcement that their struggle was not in vain and that the city's endurance could translate into tangible gains on the battlefield. Conversely, for the German troops, each ambush, each destroyed convoy, and each sudden counterattack underscored the unpredictable and inhospitable nature of the siege, compounding existing frustrations caused by logistical difficulties, harsh weather, and the ever-present specter of starvation and attrition. The sense that no advance could be secure, that every position might be subject to sudden, brutal disruption, created a psychological strain that gradually eroded cohesion and hampered operational efficiency. These operations were not isolated events, but part of a larger strategic pattern that emphasized flexibility, improvisation, and the integration of civilian and military effort. Couriers, scouts, and supply teams coordinated with frontline units to ensure that intelligence and reinforcements could be moved where they were most needed, while civilians provided vital support in maintaining supply caches, alerting forces to enemy movements, and even assisting in ambush preparations. The siege had created a scenario in which survival and combat effectiveness were interdependent, and the success of guerrilla actions and counterattacks reflected a collective effort that blurred the lines between soldier and citizen, turning the entire city into an active participant in its own defense. As these months unfolded, the German forces found themselves repeatedly checked, frustrated, and gradually pushed back, their initial momentum stalled by a combination of environmental challenges, tenacious defenders, and the persistent execution of guerrilla tactics and counterattacks. Every engagement, whether in the forests surrounding Leningrad, on frozen lakes, or along critical supply routes, reinforced the broader lesson that material superiority alone could not overcome determination, adaptability, and knowledge of the terrain. The defenders' ability to integrate unconventional tactics, environmental mastery, and collective resilience transformed the city's plight into a narrative of endurance, demonstrating that even under siege, strategy, courage, and ingenuity could shift the balance against an overwhelmingly powerful adversary. The struggle around Leningrad during this phase of the siege became a testament to the interplay of human ingenuity, environmental advantage, and relentless determination, as guerrilla raids and counterattacks turned the harsh winters from an obstacle into an ally and allowed the defenders to reclaim initiative in a battle that seemed tilted overwhelmingly against them. These actions, both small and large, intertwined with the larger narrative of survival and endurance that had been unfolding since the siege began, ensuring that Leningrad remained a city of resistance, where hope persisted despite deprivation, suffering, and the omnipresent threat of annihilation, and where every successful strike against the German forces was a reminder that courage, strategy, and resilience could bend even the harshest conditions to the will of those determined to survive. As the Siege of Leningrad dragged on into its second, third, and ultimately fourth year, the German Army Group North found itself increasingly isolated and unable to achieve its strategic objectives, a condition that would steadily erode both its combat effectiveness and morale, setting the stage for one of the most consequential chapters of the Eastern Front. From the very beginning, the Army Group had been denied the full complement of heavy artillery and armored support necessary to capture a city as formidable and well defended as Leningrad, and the withdrawal of Panzer Group 4 to participate in the drive on Moscow left the northern force virtually immobile, relying on limited infantry and artillery that could only slow the defenders rather than break them. Over time, the effects of this isolation became painfully evident, as the Army Group was forced to hold extended lines, maintain defensive positions in extreme conditions, and confront a population that, despite extreme deprivation, remained fiercely committed to survival and resistance. The harsh winters, the unrelenting guerrilla raids, the frozen terrain, and the ever-present logistical challenges combined to place Army Group North in a position where attrition became inevitable. And every month that passed without reinforcement chipped away at the cohesion and fighting power of these forces. The siege, designed by Hitler to starve the city into submission rather than risk costly urban combat, created a paradox for the German command. While the defenders of Leningrad suffered extreme deprivation and loss of life, the attackers too faced hardships that were often overlooked in broader narratives of the war. Their supply lines were overstretched, their vehicles incapacitated by mud and frost, and their positions frequently harassed by sudden, unexpected counterattacks that exploited every terrain advantage and environmental challenge. German divisions became increasingly threadbare as reinforcements were diverted to more pressing sectors of the front, leaving the northern flank poorly supported and highly vulnerable to even minor disruptions. Every failed assault, every stalled advance, and every ambushed convoy highlighted the limitations imposed by isolation, while the resilience of the defenders and the harsh Russian winters transformed what was intended as a siege into a slow, grinding attritional struggle. For the soldiers of Army Group North, the psychological burden of prolonged isolation weighed heavily alongside the physical challenges. Troops stationed in the northern sector knew that reinforcements were unlikely and that their operational priorities were always secondary to the demands of Army Group Center and Army Group South. This awareness fostered a creeping sense of futility, as every advance seemed temporary, every hard-won position vulnerable, and the logistical difficulties insurmountable. Yet even under these conditions, the soldiers continued to fight, constructing defensive lines, maintaining positions under constant threat of Soviet counterattack, and engaging in repeated attempts to secure footholds around the city, actions that required discipline, endurance, and an acceptance of the relentless attrition that had become the defining feature of their campaign. The resilience of the defenders, meanwhile, did not waver. Soviet forces, well acquainted with the terrain and supported by an intimate knowledge of the local population, maintained persistent pressure through raids, ambushes, and targeted counterattacks that disrupted German operations and forced the diversion of even the limited reinforcements Army Group North received. Every engagement, no matter how small, served to amplify the broader effect of attrition, gradually sapping the enemy's strength while preserving the city's capacity to resist. This interplay of pressure and survival, where each side's tactical actions had long-term strategic consequences, demonstrated the complex dynamics of a protracted siege, where success was measured not in immediate conquest but in endurance, adaptation, and the ability to survive under conditions that could obliterate unprepared forces. Winter remained a critical factor throughout this period, shaping the rhythm of operations and favoring defenders who were acclimated to the conditions. Frozen lakes. Heavy snow and temperatures that dropped far below what many German troops had previously encountered created natural obstacles that impeded offensive action while providing cover and mobility advantages to Soviet units. Vehicles froze in place, engines seized, and supply convoys bogged down or became irretrievable in mud or snow, further exacerbating the isolation of Army Group North. Meanwhile, the defenders used every opportunity to reinforce fortifications, deploy improvised weaponry, and conduct raids that exploited these conditions, demonstrating an ability to turn environmental adversity into strategic advantage. As months stretched into years, the strain of isolation was compounded by the broader strategic context. Reinforcements that might have provided critical relief were continually redirected to other theaters where the German High Command deemed them more essential, leaving the Northern Front to contend with dwindling resources. Constant harassment and the relentless effects of winter and attrition. German divisions were worn down, their cohesion challenged, and their capacity to mount decisive operations severely diminished. Officers and soldiers alike understood that the siege, which had been intended to bring rapid capitulation, had instead become a long, grinding struggle in which the enemy's endurance and the unforgiving Russian environment determined the tempo of the conflict. By the opening months of 1944, the cumulative effects of isolation, attrition, and Soviet resilience reached a critical juncture. The Red Army launched a massive winter offensive designed to break the siege and reclaim territory lost to the German advance. Applying overwhelming force against the weakened and dispersed units of Army Group North. The operation, supported by years of preparation, local knowledge, and superior logistics, gradually forced the beleaguered Germans into retreat, lifting the siege that had defined the northern sector for nearly 3 years. The once impervious encirclement crumbled under sustained pressure, and the isolation that had characterized Army Group North became a liability that the Soviets were able to exploit decisively. The lifting of the siege in January 1944 did not instantly resolve the suffering or reverse the losses experienced by the city's population, but it marked a turning point that validated the strategy of endurance, adaptation, and collective resistance that had defined the Leningrad defense. Army Group North, isolated for so long, was forced into a withdrawal that reflected both the strategic failure of its original mission and the persistent strength of the Soviet defenders. The troops, diminished and exhausted, were pushed back through the northern territories, a testament to the cumulative effect of attrition, environmental hardship, and the relentless pressure exerted by determined defenders who had survived unimaginable deprivation. In the larger narrative of the Eastern Front, the experience of Army Group North highlights the interplay of isolation, inadequate reinforcement, and environmental challenges as critical factors that can determine the outcome of prolonged operations. The Siege of Leningrad, with its human cost, tactical ingenuity, and eventual lifting, serve as a case study in how endurance, strategic patience, and the exploitation of both natural conditions and enemy limitations can shift the balance even against a technically superior and initially well-equipped force. It is a story that underscores the complex dynamics of warfare, where victory is often determined not only by firepower or numbers, but by the capacity to adapt, survive, and persist in the face of seemingly insurmountable adversity, and where the ultimate lifting of the siege in January 1944 stands as a testament to the combined power of resilience, strategy, and collective human determination. As the final chapters of the Siege of Leningrad unfolded, the city, battered and starved, yet unbroken, emerged as a testament to human resilience, courage, and the enduring spirit of survival in the face of unimaginable adversity. For nearly 900 days, the people of Leningrad had endured hardships that few outside the city could fully comprehend: harsh winters, relentless bombardment, scarcity of food and water, disease, and the ever-present spectre of death. Families were torn apart, children grew up amid ruins and fear, and the streets that once echoed with the rhythm of daily life became silent witnesses to suffering and perseverance alike. Yet despite these enormous human costs, the city endured. Its survival was not the result of a single act of heroism, but rather the cumulative effort of soldiers, volunteers, students, naval brigades, and ordinary citizens who, together, transformed despair into determination and adversity into organized, purposeful resistance. Throughout the siege, the defenders had shown an extraordinary capacity to adapt to overwhelming circumstances. Under General Zhukov's leadership, the city's military and civilian defenses were transformed from disorganization into a network of strategic positions. Improvised artillery and coordinated counterattacks, volunteers of all ages and backgrounds, including students and naval brigades, were mobilized to bolster defenses, operate critical supply lines, and even engage directly with the enemy in raids and skirmishes that slowed the German advance. Every small act of resistance contributed to a larger tapestry of endurance, proving that unity and strategy could counterbalance the overwhelming might of the attackers. Each day survived was a quiet but profound victory, reinforcing the idea that resilience is forged not in moments of ease, but in the crucible of sustained adversity. The German forces, for their part, struggled against a combination of environmental challenges, strategic missteps, and the determined resistance of Leningrad's defenders. Immobilized by the autumn mud and the harsh winters, deprived of reinforcements, and increasingly demoralized by guerrilla raids and counterattacks, Army Group North was gradually weakened, unable to secure the city or close the siege completely. Despite initial advantages in numbers and technology, the Germans were forced into a prolonged attritional struggle that drained resources and morale alike. The eventual retreat through the Baltic states highlighted the limits of brute force when faced with environmental hardship. Strategic improvisation, and the sustained endurance of a civilian population willing to fight for survival. The lifting of the siege in January 1944 marked not only a military victory for the Soviet forces, but also a symbolic triumph for the people of Leningrad. The city had survived a nearly 3-year ordeal, proving that determination, coordination, and an unyielding commitment to survival could overcome even the most formidable of challenges. Streets that had once been deathly silent began to echo again with the cautious stirrings of life. Families reunited, communities began the painstaking work of rebuilding, and the resilience demonstrated during the darkest days of the siege became a defining chapter in the city's history. Leningrad's survival also provided a broader lesson for humanity. That endurance, ingenuity, and unity can stand against overwhelming adversity, and that hope and courage, even in the most desperate circumstances, can pave the way for renewal and reconstruction. The enormous human loss, however, cannot be overlooked. Tens of thousands of citizens had perished, leaving behind empty homes, shattered families, and scars that would never fully heal. Starvation, disease, and exposure claimed countless lives, and the psychological and cultural impact of such prolonged suffering reverberated through generations. Yet within this tragedy lay profound lessons about resilience, collective responsibility, and the power of human will. Each survivor, each act of courage, and each successful defensive maneuver contributed to a narrative that underscored the capacity of communities to endure and resist even under the most extreme pressures. The story of Leningrad reminds us that history is not only written in victories or defeats on maps, but in the lived experiences of people who endure and adapt, who rise in defiance of suffering, and who transform the very act of survival into a symbol of strength and resilience. For modern audiences, Leningrad's story offers not only historical insight, but also enduring inspiration. It demonstrates the capacity of ordinary people to shape the course of events through courage, creativity, and collective action. It challenges us to reflect on the meaning of endurance, the responsibilities of communities under siege, and the value of unity in confronting challenges that seem insurmountable. The City of Survival, despite enormous human costs, underscores the idea that resilience is both an individual and collective endeavor, requiring sacrifice, strategy, and above all, a belief in the possibility of hope even amid despair. Thank you so much for watching this exploration of the Siege of Leningrad. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more historical accounts and in-depth analysis of the world's most significant events. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to life. From all of us here, have a peaceful night and sleep well. And may the resilience and courage of Leningrad inspire us all to face our challenges with determination and hope.